Max, you gotta do something! How many times, Max?
Two best friends, a turquoise Thunderbird, and one freeze frame that's been debated for over 30 years. Thelma and Louise hit theaters in May 1991 and immediately turned into the most argued about movie of the year. Half the country stood up and cheered. The other half called it toxic feminism and 2 hours of man-hating propaganda. Time magazine put them on the cover, critics wrote essays, and Geena Davis and Susan Sarandon became the faces of a culture war nobody saw coming. Welcome to Thelma and Louise. The movie that started as a vision at 4 a.m, got rejected by every studio in Hollywood, and ended up sparking national debates about feminism, friendship, and whether blowing up a trucker's rig counted as justified revenge. Today we're diving into 15 weird facts about a film that paired two actresses who weren't supposed to be in it, launched Brad Pitt's career with a $6,000 payday, and made audiences so uncomfortable that critics accused it of being anti-male propaganda. Now, before we get started, be sure to like and subscribe because it really does help this channel. Number 15. Callie Khouri saw the entire script in her head while sitting in her car. Callie Khouri wasn't a screenwriter. She was a music video production coordinator in Los Angeles, grinding through sleazy shoots and wondering if her creative ambitions would ever amount to anything. Then one night in early 1988, sitting in her car at 4 a.m. outside the ramshackle Santa Monica bungalow she shared with two roommates, she had a vision. Not an idea. A vision. Two women on a crime spree, running from their ordinary lives toward freedom they'd never experienced. She saw where they started and exactly where they ended up. The whole story downloaded into her brain in a single flash. Khouri spent the next 6 months writing her first screenplay in longhand at home, then retyping it at her day job when nobody was looking. She had zero formal training. She'd watched movies, read some books, glanced at a few scripts to understand formatting. That was it. What she didn't know was that she was attempting the nearly impossible, convincing 1980s Hollywood to greenlight an original female-driven script from an unknown writer with no track record. Here's the beautiful part. Her inexperience was actually her superpower. Khouri later said she didn't know enough about the industry to understand how unlikely success was. So she just wrote what she saw in that 4 a.m. vision, without compromising or second-guessing. The script she finished was Thelma and Louise, and it would win her an Oscar, spark a national conversation, and redefine what Hollywood thought women could do on screen. All because she sat in her car at 4 a.m. and refused to ignore what she saw. Number 14. Larry David. Accidentally inspired the movie's most traumatic scene. The parking lot assault scene wasn't random movie violence. It came from Callie Khouri's real life, and one of the incidents that inspired it involved Larry David. Yeah, that Larry David, future creator of Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. Back when Khouri was waitressing at the Improv Comedy Club in Los Angeles, she asked David to walk her to her car one night because the parking lot felt sketchy. Smart move, right? Except as they walked across that lot, two teenagers held them up at gunpoint, robbed them, and left Khouri shaking with rage and powerlessness. That wasn't the only incident. Another time, a man jumped Khouri and her friend, country singer Pam Tillis, and stole their purses. Khouri told Vanity Fair years later that if she'd had a weapon during either attack, she would have used it. That fury, that split-second realization that the world isn't safe and nobody's coming to save you, that's the DNA of Louise shooting Harlan in the parking lot. It wasn't gratuitous Hollywood violence. It was Khouri channeling every woman who'd been harassed, threatened, or violated, and wondered what would happen if they fought back instead of staying silent. Khouri even based Thelma's character partly on Pam Tillis, her friend who got robbed with her. The script wasn't just inspired by random bad experiences. It was personal, specific, and rooted in real terror that Khouri transformed into a story about women refusing to be victims. Larry David walking someone to their car became part of cinema history. The irony is perfect. David built an entire career on awkward social situations, and one of those situations helped create one of the most iconic feminist films ever made. Number 13, Michelle Pfeiffer. Still can't watch it without crying. Michelle Pfeiffer and Jodie Foster were cast first, not Geena Davis and Susan Sarandon. Pfeiffer and Foster had the roles locked down, Ridley Scott was attached to direct, and Thelma and Louise was ready to roll. Then production hit delays, financial chaos at MGM Pathé, scheduling reshuffles, the kind of Hollywood dysfunction that kills movies daily. Foster had a hard start date on The Silence of the Lambs and couldn't wait. Pfeiffer had one on Love Field. Both had to drop out. Pfeiffer told Variety in 2017 that she still regrets it. She'd been offered one of the defining female roles of the decade, a character women would quote for the next 30 years, and scheduling conflicts forced her to walk away. Love Field eventually earned Pfeiffer an Oscar nomination, so it wasn't a total loss. But it wasn't Thelma and Louise. Nothing else was Thelma and Louise. And here's the twist. The production delays that cost Pfeiffer and Foster their roles actually saved the movie. When filming finally started, Geena Davis and Susan Sarandon stepped in, and their chemistry became legendary. Davis was 34. Sarandon was 44, both older than Corey originally envisioned. But that age difference worked. Louise's world weariness played perfectly against Thelma's awakening. And the dynamic only worked because Sarandon brought gravity and Davis brought transformation. So, Pfeiffer lost a role she literally can't bear to watch someone else play, and the movie became a cultural phenomenon with two actresses who weren't even supposed to be in it. Number 12. Brad Pitt got rejected 3 times before landing the role. Brad Pitt wasn't Brad Pitt yet. He was a struggling actor taking any audition he could get, living off bit parts and hoping for a break. When the JD role came up for Thelma and Louise, Ridley Scott auditioned him and said he was too young. The part went to William Baldwin instead. Then Baldwin dropped out to do Backdraft with Ron Howard. The role came back to Pitt. Scott still thought he was too young and moved on again. Robert Downey Jr. wanted it. Scott rejected him, reportedly saying Downey was too short to stand next to Geena Davis. Pitt auditioned a 3rd time. According to Pitt in later interviews, he thought the role was gone, mentally moved on, then got a call back saying it was available again. He came back for chemistry reads with Davis, and everything changed. Davis told Graham Norton years later that Pitt was so charismatic during the audition that she kept screwing up her lines, just staring at him like she'd forgotten how to speak. She was so struck by him, she worried she was ruining his audition. Scott finally cast him. The role paid $6,000 total for about 14 minutes of screen time. Pitt shot the love scene with Davis over 2 days, and Davis later said she took care of him on set because he was nervous and inexperienced. That $6,000 scene became Pitt's audition tape for the entire industry. Suddenly, casting directors who'd never heard of him were calling with offers. 1 year later, Pitt was making $500,000 for California. 2 years after that, $4 million for Seven. The irony is delicious. Baldwin left Thelma and Louise to do Backdraft and became forgettable. Pitt got Thelma and Louise by default and became a superstar. Sometimes the role you lose saves you for the one that changes everything. Pitt's $6,000 payday became the best investment of his career, and he didn't even know it was happening. Number 11. George Clooney auditioned and had no idea until 25 years later. Brad Pitt wasn't the only future A-lister reading for JD. The role attracted every young actor in Hollywood who understood that 14 minutes opposite Geena Davis could detonate a career. George Clooney auditioned. So did Mark Ruffalo, Grant Show, Christian Slater, River Phoenix, and Robert Downey Jr. But here's the weird part. Clooney didn't realize he'd auditioned until 25 years later when he randomly mentioned it to Geena Davis on a plane. Davis was sitting next to Clooney, they got talking, and Clooney casually said he'd read for JD back in 1990. Davis had zero memory of it. She'd done chemistry reads with multiple guys, but only Pitt stuck in her brain because he was the one who made her forget her lines. Clooney laughed it off. By 2015, he was George Clooney, so losing a role in 1990 didn't sting. But it's wild to imagine how different both careers might have looked if Scott had chosen Clooney instead. Would Clooney have had the same breakout? Would Pitt have stayed stuck in TV guest spots for another few years? We'll never know. What we do know is Scott made the right call. Pitt brought a specific combination of danger and charm that made Thelma's decision to sleep with a stranger feel reckless but inevitable. Clooney might have been too smooth, too self-aware. Pitt played JD like a kid who didn't realize he was breaking hearts and stealing money, which is exactly what the role needed. Number 10, the trucker got blown up, early to scare the hell out of him. The tanker explosion is one of the most satisfying moments in the movie. Marco St. John plays the truck driver, who spends half the film making obscene gestures at Thelma and Louise. And when they finally blow up his rig, Audiences literally cheered in theaters. What they didn't know was Ridley Scott deliberately scared St. John to get an authentic reaction. St. John didn't want a stunt double. He wanted to stand there himself, about 50 yards from the truck, and react when the explosion went off. Scott agreed, but added a twist. Scott told St. John the effects team would detonate on go after he counted down, ready, steady, go. Standard procedure, right? Except Scott triggered the explosion on steady instead, catching St. John completely off guard. According to author Becky Aikman's book, Off the Cliff, Scott later admitted the trick. It had to go before he knew it would happen to scare the shit out of him. The look of shock and terror on St. John's face in that shot isn't acting. It's genuine fear because the fireball erupted a full beat before he expected it. The reaction made the shot. Audiences thought they were watching a character respond to an explosion. They were actually watching an actor realize his director had just pranked him with high explosives. To St. John's credit, he stayed professional and never complained. The shot made the movie, and his character became one of the most hated figures in 1990s cinema. Women applauded the explosion. Critics debated whether destroying property counted as empowerment or revenge fantasy. Number 9, Geena Davis's ex-boyfriend played her terrible husband. Christopher McDonald, who played Daryl, Thelma's insufferable husband, wasn't just some random actor. He was Geena Davis's ex-boyfriend. They'd been engaged in the mid-1980s before Davis left him for Jeff Goldblum. By 1990, they were friendly enough that Davis told Ridley Scott, "He's the funniest guy in the world." Scott auditioned McDonald, cracked up through the whole thing, and cast him immediately. During filming, McDonald had a scene walking to his car in the driveway. Simple blocking. Except McDonald genuinely tripped, lost his footing, stumbled forward, nearly went down. But instead of breaking character and asking for another take, McDonald stayed in the moment, recovered with perfect comedic timing, and kept the scene going. Scott kept the cameras rolling, and the stumble made the final cut because it was so perfectly Daryl, this self-important buffoon who can't even walk to his car without looking ridiculous. The fact that McDonald was Davis's ex added another layer. They'd been engaged. She'd left him for someone else. Now they were playing a married couple who couldn't stand each other, and McDonald's accidental pratfall became part of the movie. Real-life awkwardness translating into perfect screen dysfunction. To McDonald's credit, he never complained about the trip making the film. He understood it made Daryl more pathetic, which made Thelma's escape more satisfying. And Davis understood that casting her ex-fiancé as her terrible husband was either genius or deeply weird, possibly both. Either way, the stumble stays in the movie forever. A happy accident that proves the best moments are often the ones nobody planned. Number 8. Susan Sarandon improvised the kiss and kept it secret. The kiss between Thelma and Louise right before they drive off the cliff wasn't in Callie Corey's script. Susan Sarandon came up with it on the day of filming, told Geena Davis about it privately, and kept it secret from everyone else on set, including Ridley Scott. Sarandon wanted the moment to feel spontaneous and unplanned. So when cameras rolled and she leaned in to kiss Davis, it was the first time anyone else had seen it. Scott loved it. The kiss made the cut. Sarandon revealed this years later in the 1995 documentary, The Celluloid Closet, explaining that she wanted Louise and Thelma to have a moment of real connection before the end. Not necessarily a romantic kiss, but an acknowledgement. We've been through hell together, and whatever happens next, we're facing it as one. Some critics debated whether the kiss made the relationship romantic. Sarandon and Davis both said no. It was about friendship, intimacy, love that doesn't fit into neat categories. But test audiences apparently found it confusing, which might explain why it's so brief in the final film. You can miss it if you blink. Sarandon kept it subtle on purpose, but the fact that she improvised it, kept it secret from the crew, and only told Davis minutes before shooting shows how deeply both actresses understood these characters. They weren't just reciting lines. They were living as Thelma and Louise. The kiss added tenderness to a scene that could have been pure defiance. Instead of just two outlaws choosing death over capture, it became two friends choosing each other. Sarandon gave them that moment without asking permission. And it's one of the most emotionally powerful beats in the movie. Number 7. Ridley Scott's original ending showed the car hitting the ground. The iconic freeze-frame ending, where the Thunderbird hangs suspended in midair forever, wasn't Ridley Scott's first choice. His original cut was way darker. Scott showed the car falling all the way down the canyon, tumbling end over end, smashing against rocks, crumpling at the bottom in a horrific heap. Then a shot of Harvey Keitel's Detective Hal Slocum staring down at the wreckage with devastation on his face before turning and walking back to his car. All scored to a mournful B.B. King track. Producers hated it. Test audiences hated it. Too depressing, too final, too much of a gut punch after spending 2 hours rooting for these women. Scott initially pushed back, defending his artistic vision, but eventually agreed to compromise. He cut the fall completely, froze the frame with the car midair, and swapped B.B. King's sad blues for Hans Zimmer's more uplifting orchestral score. The result became one of the most debated endings in cinema history, but Scott entertained even darker alternatives before settling on the freeze frame. At one point, he considered having Louise push Thelma out of the car at the last second, so Thelma survived alone while Louise died. Susan Sarandon apparently asked Scott point blank, "Are you really going to do that?" Scott eventually admitted he couldn't. The entire point was they made this choice together. Splitting them up at the end would have destroyed everything the movie built. The freeze frame was perfect because it refused to answer the question. Did they die? Did they escape into myth? Are they forever frozen between freedom and death? Scott's response when pressed, "It doesn't matter, they're free." A happy ending would have been a lie. A tragic ending would have been defeated. The freeze frame was neither and both, letting audiences interpret it however they needed. Number 6, they destroyed 3 Thunderbirds, getting one perfect shot. Ridley Scott needed the Thunderbird to fly off that cliff, not fall, not tumble, fly. The production bought 5 identical 1966 turquoise Ford Thunderbirds, spent thousands customizing them to match perfectly, and hauled 3 of them to Dead Horse Point in Utah for the final jump scene. They had 3 chances to nail the shot. The crew spent 2 hours rigging cables, adjusting ramps, calculating angles to make sure the car would soar instead of dropping like a stone. First attempt, disaster. The Thunderbird nosedived straight off the edge like a rock. Absolutely useless footage. Scott knew immediately he needed lift, air, the sense that Thelma and Louise were flying toward freedom instead of plummeting toward death. So the crew went back to work, adjusted the ramp, added more spring, and tried again the next day. Second attempt, perfection. The Thunderbird launched, caught serious air, and sailed through the frame beautifully. That's the shot frozen forever in the final film. The third car stayed on the ground, as backup they never needed. But buying 5 T-Birds total wasn't overkill. Vintage cars break down constantly in desert heat. Stunts destroy vehicles. Scott needed options, and spending over $30,000 on matching Thunderbirds was worth it for that one iconic shot that would define the entire movie. Years later, one of the surviving production cars sold at auction for $71,500. Not bad for a prop that started life as a dusty classic nobody wanted. The Thunderbird became as much a character as the women driving it, and Scott understood that from day one. That's why he obsessed over every detail, every paint match, every shot of that turquoise convertible against red rock and endless blue sky. The car had to fly because Thelma and Louise were flying, even if only for a frozen moment. Number 5, the Grand Canyon scene. Wasn't filmed at the Grand Canyon. Louise literally says in the movie, "I think it's the Grand Canyon," except it isn't. It's Dead Horse Point State Park in Utah, about 300 miles away, and the reason is bureaucratic nonsense. Ridley Scott wanted to film the final scene at the actual Grand Canyon. He fought for permits, made his case to the National Park Service, argued that the scene was essential and would be done safely. The Park Service said no. Safety concerns, environmental impact worries, and fear of setting a precedent for action movies filming in national parks. So Scott pivoted fast. His location scouts found Dead Horse Point, which had the dramatic cliffs and vast scale he needed without the permit headaches. The final approach where Thelma and Louise drive toward the edge was filmed there. The aerial shots showing the massive canyon below were filmed separately at the actual Grand Canyon from helicopters months later and edited in during post-production. Perfect movie magic, unless someone tells you the seams are invisible. Here's the beautiful irony. After Thelma and Louise became a massive hit, tourism at Dead Horse Point jumped over 30%. People wanted to see the Thelma and Louise cliff. The park eventually put up a commemorative plaque at the exact spot now known as Thelma and Louise Point. The location that had nothing to do with the Grand Canyon became so famous it needed official recognition. Meanwhile, the Grand Canyon, which refused to let Scott film there, ended up in the movie anyway through aerial footage. Number 4. Ridley Scott. Asked Gina Davis to go topless and got shut down. During pre-production, Ridley Scott asked Gina Davis to do a scene where Thelma takes her shirt off. Davis was uncomfortable, but didn't want to cause problems or seem difficult. So, she made an awkward exit to lunch, found Susan Sarandon, and asked what she should do. Sarandon listened, agreed there was zero reason for Thelma to be topless in the story, and marched directly over to Scott to tell him Davis wouldn't be doing it. Scott dropped the request immediately. No argument, no pressure, just okay, and moved on with the script. But the fact that Davis felt she needed Sarandon to intervene reveals how pervasive Hollywood's pressure was, even on a supposedly feminist production. Callie Curry wrote the script. Mimi Polk-Gitlin produced it. 2 female leads driving the story. A movie explicitly about women taking control of their lives. And still, the director asked for nudity that served no purpose except putting a woman's body on screen for male audiences. To Scott's credit, he backed down the second Sarandon pushed back. And to Sarandon's credit, she used her experience and industry status to protect Davis without hesitation. But the larger point stands. Even groundbreaking feminist films weren't immune to the male gaze trying to sneak in through the side door. Davis and Sarandon shut it down hard, and Thelma and Louise stayed focused on character instead of gratuitous skin. Number 3, Brad Pitt's love scene was so awkward, he still talks about it. When Brad Pitt finally landed the role of JD after 3 rounds of auditions, he thought the hard part was over. Then he showed up to film the motel room love scene with Gina Davis and realized the actual hard part was about to begin. The scene required Pitt to be shirtless and vulnerable, while an entire film crew stood around watching. According to Pitt in later interviews, it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of his early career. Pitt's exact quote about filming those scenes. That love scene went on for 2 days of shooting. It was awkward being nearly naked with everybody standing around. 2 full days. Dozens of crew members. Lights, cameras, makeup artists adjusting things between takes. And Pitt, still a relative unknown at 26 years old, trying to look confident and hot while secretly dying inside. Davis later said she took care of him on set because she could tell he was nervous and inexperienced. But here's the beautiful irony. That awkward, uncomfortable love scene became the moment that launched Pitt's entire career. Women left theaters talking about Brad Pitt. Casting directors suddenly knew his name. That scene he hated filming, the one where he felt exposed and uncomfortable with everyone watching, became his audition tape for Hollywood stardom. Within a year, he was booking major roles and making serious money. Number 2, Time magazine. Put them on the cover, and America lost its mind. In June 1991, Time magazine ran a cover story with the headline, "Why Thelma and Louise Strikes a Nerve." The movie had been out barely 3 weeks and was already the most controversial film in America. Male critics were calling it toxic feminism on the big screen and degrading to men. Conservative commentator John Leo wrote a piece titled Toxic Feminism, arguing the film would inspire women to commit violence. The U.S. Catholic Bishop's Office for Film and Broadcasting declared it morally offensive for glamorizing crime. On the flip side, feminists hailed it as the ultimate female empowerment story. Susan Sarandon called it a cowboy movie. Callie Curry called it an outlaw film. Audiences packed theaters and then argued in parking lots about whether Thelma and Louise were heroes or criminals, victims or villains, feminist icons or dangerous role models. The debate raged all summer and became a national conversation about gender, power, and what stories women were allowed to tell. Here's what made it fascinating. Nobody argued the movie was poorly made. Everyone agreed it was well-crafted, well-acted, beautifully shot. The controversy was entirely about what it meant. Male critics were shocked that 2 women could be outlaws without being punished or redeemed by men. Female audiences were shocked. Hollywood finally made a buddy film where the buddies were women and they didn't need men to save them. and everyone was shocked by the ending, which refused to apologize or provide closure. Corey said the issues surrounding the film were feminist, but she never intended it as a feminist manifesto. She just wanted to write a story about two ordinary women who wanted better lives and ran out of options. The fact that became controversial said more about 1991 America than it did about the screenplay.